Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. WeatherBrains episode 900. 900. The big 900. Here we are at episode 900. Wow. This is for the 17th of April, 2023. If you're having a good day, good week. For those that are new here, if you want to see the actual beginning of the show, move the slider over about 8 minutes, and we'll get this thing cranked up. But this is the pre-show. It is the magical time of this program where we do three things. What do we do here? We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and on occasion, we say very outrageous things. All right, got the embed code going. I think the invites have gone out, so we're good to go. Yes, indeed. It's amazingly quiet weather-wise where we are. Down here at this latitude, typically in mid-April, we're coming out of a severe weather event. We are in the middle of a severe weather event, or we have one coming up. And it really doesn't look like we're going to have one for at least the next 10 days. It is remarkably quiet, so we can certainly celebrate that. I know some other folks around the nation will probably have a little active weather later in the week. We'll talk about that in the weather roundup. But I think most everybody's going to be here this week. I think Neil sent a note. He's got an AMS function in Washington. He might be a little late joining us tonight, or maybe he might miss the show. He is a very busy man, but I think everybody else will be online. So, and I tried to get the pre-show started on time. The last couple of weeks I have been tardy. So we're doing the pre-show here about 6 minutes before. And for those that don't know, we simulcast this on some of the local television stations here in this market. And we have to kind of remember at the top of the hour, that's when they join us. And most people listen to this show. We've been doing 900 episodes, and we started off as an audio podcast, and we are still a core audio podcast. But about a quarter of our audience watches now, either live like this or later via the YouTubes. But anyway, we'll get the thing cranked up here in about 5 minutes. For those that are new, we got Bill Murray, who we know where Bill is because he sent a photograph of his meal this evening. He allegedly is in Bay County, Florida, and I believe it.
It's true.
I believe every word he says. But Bill, you got a problem. Your microwave is flashing back there.
I don't know what I can do about that.
Yeah, it's just
food.
So Bill is at the beach. He's down there showing the ladies the way to the beach. You know, ma'am, the beach is that away.
That's not true.
Well, what do you mean? I mean, a lady might ask you the way to the beach, and you have to be ready for that question if you ever get that down there. So
everybody I've seen so far is about 70 years old. So.
Well, it might be a 70-year-old woman. It's okay. You still need to show her the way to the beach. Take her to the gun show. Sun's out, guns out. You know that.
The gun show.
I have not been to Panama City Beach in a long time.
I know it was my childhood beach, because we came here when I was a kid every year. And then, that's where we came on our senior trip in 1980. I shared a picture on Twitter tonight I went in honor of my meal from May of 1980. And I had to have a hurricane, James, because you could have a hurricane in 1980 when you were 18 years old. And I enjoyed it very, very much. The place hasn't changed one iota in 43 years. It's crazy. So, but it was really good and I enjoyed it.
I should go back and visit sometime. A coworker, I'm not going to say this person's name because that would be horribly embarrassing. He had a bad experience in Panama City. And after that, I just decided I'm not going to go back there for a while. But he was staying at some place down there. And the next door, there were some pretty wild teenagers. I think it was spring break. And they were out of control, making horrible noise, drunk as a skunk, just, profanity, the whole thing. And he just knocked on the door and casually asked if they would mind being quiet. They had young children. And the next day, those kids broke into his room and they found his camcorder in there. This is back when we had camcorders before phones. And What's the best way to describe what happened here? They got everybody's toothbrush out of the bathroom, and they exposed the toothbrush to a part of the body that we don't need to be talking about here. We're using his camcorder. So when they got home from Panama City, they watched their home videos, and that was on there. And they said, we're never going to Panama City again. And I said, I might want to avoid that. I'm getting old, and the spring break crowd still wild down there.
They're trying to clean it up. I think it does still have some rough elements, but they're really working hard to turn it back into a family destination. We're working on a project up north on the other side of the halfway bridge, and downtown Panama City took, of course, a beating from Hurricane Michael. And there's a lot of development going on there. Of course, the NSA has a huge base there now, and there's a lot of government military. So there's building on every corner. I mean, it's really crazy what's going on down here. But probably parts of Panama City could have used a little bit of a left turn by Hurricane Michael for some urban renewal. But it's terrible for the parts of like downtown. Folks over there suffered a lot. They were nowhere near the water. The wind was terrible, and it caused a lot of destruction. But there's some good things going on, and it still brings back enough memories of my childhood to give some warm and pleasant feelings for sure. Jim Minnick, hello, can you hear us okay?
I can. Can you hear me?
James, I think Jim's going to share some images at some point if you want to turn on screen sharing.
We have fixed that as we speak. Now, I like Cape Sandblast. I'm more of a Port St. Joe, Cape Sandblast kind of guy. In my old age, that's a sign when you get old. I mean, you just, Cape Sandblast, it's quiet. There's no high rises. It's kind of isolated. It's just a peaceful place, and peace is what we all need, And
you got access to Apalachicola from there, which is a cool little town.
Yeah, and St. George Island. I mean, the whole thing around there. It's.
I saw a house today. I was looking, on Zillow, and I saw one on Dog Island. James, I had no idea where Dog Island was. It's really rustic house right on the water. You look like, the climate change is about to take it with it. And, I started looking, that's only like $400,000. And I was like, that's interesting. You just don't see that. So I looked, and Dog Island literally is an island. There is no way to get there without they really mean island. So,
yep.
I think this may have been the only house on Dog Island.
All right. Welcome to our television viewers. We're at the top of the hour. I think we can start the program. So let's get the recorders here going. There's number 1, and there's number 2. And here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Join the American Meteorological Society by becoming a member of the band. The AMS Weather Band is a global community of weather enthusiasts dedicated to learning and sharing their love of science. Visit amsweatherband.org to learn more and join the band today.
WeatherBrains episode 900. 900 episodes. Are you kidding me? Who'd have thunk it? Wow. This is for the 17th of April, 2023. Our first show was on the 31st of January, 2006. So we've been here a long time. But goodness, and I would imagine that we'll get this at some point in the email segment, but one of our listeners put together a YouTube playlist of his top WeatherBrains episodes over the past 900. And initially, we were not video. We were just audio only. We added video when the TV station here wanted to put it on their digital weather channels. And so, but anyway, we'll talk about that later. So let's get this thing happening here. Troy Kimmel. Where were you in 2006, 31st of January?
I was a small tot.
Yeah, you were like 7 years old, right?
Yeah, I'm looking
Not
for lightning
BC.
strike.
Yeah. Wow.
Weather strike, so lightning strikes a weather brain. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did everyone catch that remark there?
In DC.
So, Troy, you doing all right?
Doing good. Monday, trying to wrap up the semester. We're ending the semester pretty early at the University of Texas, and this is the last class week. Finals, dead week into final exams next week, and it's all over with pretty much by the 1st of May.
Wow.
We're headed into that, university's trying to make a little room for Maymester stuff and stuff like that. So they've kind of tightened things up.
Awesome. Let's go to James Adelot, the Dr. James Adelot. But when is this PhD happening again, James?
Yeah, I got to survive this agent-based modeling class thing that I've gotten myself into this semester. So when Troy talks about the end of the semester, I just get all twitchy and worried. There's not enough time in the world yet. I took today off to work on some stuff and did make a little bit of progress. So yay. I don't know, got a year and a half, 2 years. I don't know. How long does it take to do a dissertation these days?
Where's Kim? Kim, help this man out.
Please.
It really is just a function of your ability to get through it and how efficiently you do it. I mean,
Don't depress him, Kim. Don't depress him. Now we've got to depress.
I won't depress you. I mean, I wrote my entire dissertation in about 3 months. So, once I actually decided to just stop doing research and like actually just get it written, that was my big issue. Was my advisor just like, okay, you've got to okay, here's the line in the sand, call it done, just write it now.
So do you feel better, James, now? Nope.
No.
It can be fairly, I wouldn't say painless. It's a process no matter what, but you can chug through it efficiently. And I just recommend great outlining.
Well, Kim, you're a go-getter though. I mean, really, if there's a go-getter in the world, Kim is the go-getter.
I appreciate that, but I'm going to also look back at him and say he has a full-time job and he's pursuing a PhD at the same time, and he has kids. And I only had to do one of those things at once. So, man, just good luck. He's going to make it because you are such a go-getter. So no matter how long it takes, we all treat him like he's Dr. Udall anyway. So, yeah, you'll get there.
I honestly think doing the dissertation work is going to fit into my schedule easier than the classes will. So,
yes.
Well, what you need to do is to take my route. So I just walked up on some stage wearing some cap and gown and took this thing and walked off, and you get an honorary doctorate. See, I mean that's the way to do it.
What I need.
Be like party
no
crashers.
dissertation, no nothing. I mean, you just show up. I mean that was the deal of a lifetime. So I'll always be grateful to the University of West Alabama for that, and that was a magical event, and I'm so thankful. I'm so honored. But that was my route. So there you go. All right. So let's see, Jen, how you doing? What's happening? How's life?
Good. I'm open to any college that would like to get me my honorary doctorate. That I'm open to that because I don't want to get one on my own. No, I'm good. It was crummy today, but it was a perfect day to read a book, which I read a lot of it today. I can't wait to talk about it. So it was really good. But yeah, it was one of those days where it was cold and sleety, snowy crap. So I just stayed home today and did my radio work and read a book.
So I'm writing that down. Cold, sleety, snowy crap is the show title.
Yep.
Fantastic.
That's a good one. Rick Smith, have you ever dealt with cold, sleety, snowy crap in Norman?
Oh my God, too many times. Too many times. Yes. So I feel that completely deep in my soul. So no, none of that here today. I mean, we're burning stuff up again today in Oklahoma, and I don't know if we're going to do a weather roundup later, but the opposite of snowy, sleety, whatever crap she said. So.
Well, let's just go right to Bill Murray and let's start the show before our guest bails out on us and runs and hangs up on us. Go, Bill.
Yeah, he's going to be claiming unstable internet connection here any second.
That's right. Yeah.
Our guest, WeatherBrain, tonight is the author of 8 books, including this incredible book that Jen just mentioned a moment ago. Jim Minnick, it's an honor to have you on the show tonight. Let's talk about your background. you know, in your educational and career path that you've taken, since we've all been sharing our paths along the way tonight.
Well, it's a great honor to be here with you all. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
You can hear me, correct? Okay, great. It's a great honor to be with you all, and to share this book, and to say that I am a writer and not a meteorologist. So I am a little intimidated, more than a little intimidated by this crowd, but I'm also thrilled that you are reading this book and finding it worthwhile. I live in the mountains of Virginia, where it's been a beautiful sunny day, spring coming on pretty strong, but it's also been chilly. So, and as far as background, I've I am a writer, but I've made my living teaching English at several universities, and mainly Radford University here in Southwest Virginia. And I am now writing and farming full time. So I'm glad for it. So I think that's enough background.
Now you and your wife had a blackberry or a blueberry farm, right? At
Correct.
one point. Did I read that story in Virginia Living?
Yes, that's right. And that was the years that came out. And yeah, my wife and I had this crazy blueberry dream and we created and operated one of the first certified organic pick your own blueberry farms in the mid-Atlantic. And that was in the 1990s. We did that for 12 years. It was a great farm, and I grew up with blueberries. I grew up in Pennsylvania, eating too many blueberries that my grandfather planted before I was born. And then we got this idea that maybe we could make a living doing that, which was not true, but we had fun trying, and we still, and we live on a different place now. We don't have that blueberry farm anymore, but we still have 50 blueberry bushes just for us and the birds and the neighbors, and yeah, and they're blooming.
Jim, you know, you said you weren't a meteorologist, and I was really surprised that you weren't, after I had read several chapters of the book. And I guess it's just your talent for writing. Last week we had Wayne Neely from the Weather Service of the Bahamas, and Max Mayfield said about his book about Hurricane Dorian that if you ever wanted to experience a Category 5 hurricane, just read Wayne's book. And Jen, I don't know if you felt the same way, but reading the book over the past couple of weeks, I felt the very same way about this book. You know, nobody wants to experience an F5 or an EF5 tornado. And I don't know if Udall was. I'm not sure. Maybe
it was. Yeah,
I'm sure it had to be from the destruction. But, just reading the book made me, it gave me chills. James Spann, I thought about you because you always say that on April 3rd, 1974, you saw things in the emergency room in Jasper that no human being should see. And I don't know that you've ever even spoken about it.
No, and I don't want to. I mean, it's just like, for some reason, I think I had to see that, but I was 17 and I didn't, goodness, I don't think a 17-year-old should see what I saw. And quite frankly, I don't see how anybody sees it. Paramedics deal with it all the time, I guess. But goodness, it was, just something I don't want to talk about. Probably never will.
Well, and that's understandable. But Jim, you captured that in the narrative. I really found myself thinking that, you were describing some of the same things that James Spann. We got too many Jims on here tonight. And I got a message. We'll talk later tonight to Bruce, from Midland Weather Radio, and he wrote a message. And I want to ask you this question. He said, "Hey, Bill, go back and look at the June 4th or whatever, 1955 Life magazine, because they wrote about this tornado, and there is an image in there that I just could not share on the show." Did you ever see that article in that image?
I think so. Help me out a little more.
Well, there was an article of a young man who was nearly decapitated, and And Bruce said it was such a shocking picture that he could hardly even stand to look at it.
Yeah, in the Life magazine from 1955.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Yes, I mean that's so horrible. And I debated about trying to acquire permissions to put those photos in the book, and then I just like I don't want to. I would, words are my medium, and pictures just they stick in your head a lot as well as words. But that there is several very powerful pictures that were in Life magazine shortly after this, and one is of a young man, a college man who rushed from the nearby town. He left his campus and rushed to help rescue, and he's carrying this lifeless young boy, and he talked about it like 40 years later to the local newspaper and said he knew the boy was dead, and he just tried to put that body down as gently as he could. And it changed his life. That young college student dropped out of college and eventually went back after he figured out he wanted to pursue helping other people. I think he became a teacher. But he that event really affected him. So yeah, that image is very powerful.
And Jim, I wanted to just, Bill, if I could real quick, I made a note about how descriptive you were and that you didn't hold back on the, I wrote down the word gore, but I don't mean that in that way, but I think a lot of folks kind of go past that. And they don't think about that part of the tornadoes, but you were very descriptive about the injuries and the fatalities, and your wording was very tasteful, but also real. I mean, I felt like I had gone through it and I was seeing the imagery. You don't need to see the pictures itself because your writing was so good that it just, I was captivated with the story. My heart was just breaking. So you don't need to see pictures when you're writing, is that good.
Well, thank you. And I had the great fortune of interviewing and extensively several times survivors, and they were willing to share their injuries, their stories. I mean, Bobby Atkinson, one of the main characters, is, he lost pretty much his whole family, and the injuries he sustained. Well, let's see if I can. A broken leg, 2 broken arms, a hand that was just totally mangled, concussion, several, something hit him really hard in the back, several broken ribs, and punctured lung. He had a 2x2 board that went through his back and just lodged and punctured things there. So he basically had to rescue himself. He crawled into his dad's car that was totally windowless after the tornado, and stayed there for probably several hours. And when he realized nobody was coming for him, he crawled the half mile across all the debris and finally got to a car to take him to the hospital. So yeah, the injuries, it's hard as a writer to know how far to take it, but yeah, it was when the survivors share that makes it even more powerful.
And I just went back and read that section where Bobby rescued himself, and it's just harrowing. I can't even imagine going through the amount of pain that he went through. But when he got to someone that he recognized, they drove him to the hospital. He said he thought he was going to die on the ride to the hospital. I think they were so horrified. The driver drove at 90 miles an hour to the emergency room, and but fortunately, fortunately he survived, and that's just a miracle in and of itself. But Jim, what made you? What attracted you to the tornado as a source of a book?
It's a good question because I have never lived in Kansas or the Midwest, and I've never been in a tornado, and I wasn't even born in 1955. And so I just finished my last book, which was a novel. And I was looking for a story idea, and I had this crazy idea that well, one of the writers I really admire is Fred Chappell, and he's written 4 books of poetry and 4 books of fiction, each one with an element as the main focus. And I thought that was pretty cool. And so I had just written this novel that fire was the main element, and so I was looking for something else. And my sister-in-law grew up in Udall, and she said, "Well, my little town before I was born was wiped out by a tornado," and she said, "That's some kind of wind if you want to tackle that." And so she and her family, her mother, my sister-in-law wasn't born in 1955 either, but her parents were not yet married, but they were about to get married, and they survived it. And they opened the doors, and it was a great welcoming into this small community. I grew up in a small town, but so I kind of knew what it felt like, but at the same time, I was a total stranger to these people, and they gave me their stories. That was really the kindness and power of it all.
Well, I have to be truthful you probably were caught off guard by one of my emails, because I literally thought you had been on the show before and were a meteorologist. And when I went to look for your bio, I was thrown off because I couldn't find the meteorology part. And then I realized I was in the right spot. You use an unusual technique in the beginning, and it's very captivating. The opening chapter, telling from one of the main characters' points of view, and you credit that technique to one of my favorite writers, of course, David McCullough, in the Johnstown Flood, which was my first book I ever read of his, and where he introduced you to everyone in the town through the parade, and you adopted that approach in the opening chapter. And I thought it was fascinating how you told the story of the town and all of its inhabitants through the newspaper carrier. And that was really cool.
Thank you. And I love the Johnstown book and the Johnstown's flood. And yes, I was wanting to introduce the town and figure out how to kind of give an overview of it. And when Bobby Atkinson told me that he was a newspaper boy, that was my inroad. And so I think my second interview with Bobby was, I'd figured out, I'd made that connection to the Johnstown flood technique. And so I was ready to lay out the paper route and get Bobby to tell me all the specifics of the town. And so second interview, we started out and I said, "So tell me about what delivering papers on the day of." So, and he said, "Oh no, I wasn't the paper boy that day. That was my younger brother." And that just really threw me, because here I had this perfect plan, and it kind of stumbled for a moment, but then it became even more poignant because his younger brother died in the tornado. So I was able to, with Bobby's help, describe what Gary, his younger brother, would have done that day. I mean, it's a great story. I mean, the newspapers came from the county seat, Winfield, by an airplane, small airplane that dropped the newspaper bundle in the football center of the football field. And Gary had to be there to see where it fell in case it didn't fall on the football field, or in case the bundle broke and he had to go retrieve them all. It's just a great little story. And then, that high school football field was kind of where the tornado first hit. And so it was, I used Gary on a bicycle to kind of go through the streets and could we pull up a map? Would that be?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
James has granted you that privilege already.
Okay.
Yes.
So here is a map. If you can,
yeah, I wondered if that's how you got your papers, Troy, when you were a paper boy back in the day. Did they drop them on the football field from a passing airplane?
Yeah, that's back when the newspaper were made out of stone. So
Drop the tablet.
Imagine how that would break from an airplane.
Breaking news.
Yeah, there you go.
yeah, it is. Whoa, good one.
Wow.
Okay.
That's a headline on the head. Yeah. I can't tell if is the map up or not.
Not from
Negative.
Okay. Should I just proceed without it?
Totally up to you. Yeah, you're doing a great job describing it. If you can show it, that's fine.
So I'll just
I could find it in a book and hold it up to the camera. Probably.
Okay, sure. I'll just kind of describe. So that the as most Midwestern towns, the town of Udall is set out on a grid, north, south, east, west. And the high school is in the southwest corner, and that's the direction the tornado came from. It was a brand new high school, and the grade school was a block away. And the population of Udall at the time was around 600 people, so just a very small town. And so Bobby got his papers, and he walked the first couple blocks and rolling his papers and then stuffing them in his bag. And then he got on his bike and delivered them around to the mayor and Earl Tutereau, who became one of the main characters in the book, and other people. And then he went downtown. They had a little small downtown that had I don't know how many stores, maybe 5 different stores, a post office, restaurant, and pool hall, and a community center, community building where a wedding shower was going to be that evening. And his family had a grocery store. The Atkinsons had a little grocery store there. Gas station, garage. And then the other fascinating thing, if you can pull up the map at some point, that would be great. But if not, there's a railroad that dissects the town on a kind of a diagonal. And that railroad, there was workers at the time building a side rail on it. And they were sleeping in the Pullman cars. Yeah, does that work? I think. Yeah, there you go. So you can see the railroad, how it dissects the path. Dissects the town. And I should say there's a water tower. If you right on the left-hand side, right in the middle of the 2 intersections there.
Hey, Bill, you need to Bill say a few words, because when you're speaking, we can see it, but we can't see it when Jim's speaking.
I need to do that.
Yeah. Wait, hold it back up. Now that you're talking, we can see it. So hold it back up. All right.
Yeah, there's.
All right. So then now I want to be sure we could all see it. So.
I'll just hum.
Well, how does that work for me?
There you go. We'll get it done between the 3 of us that have the book.
Okay. We'll get it done. I can't even tell. Can you see the whole map?
Now we can't hear you. Yeah.
Now they're making fun of our technology over here in the cheap seats.
Oh yeah. Hey Jim, we can't hear you when you're holding the book up, so you need to drop it.
All right.
It's a sound dampening agent. That's the other benefit of the book. You can use noise cancel.
Anyways, the railroad, it had a train on the side rail and men sleeping in it. The tornado happened at 10:35 p.m. and absolutely no warning. And so and the tornado approached perpendicular to that train and that railroad. And the fascinating thing to me is on the train. Let's see. Yeah, gosh, I need this map. It twisted the railroad like a towel. So the cars that were on the south side of the railroad got turned. Tornadoes were the spin counterclockwise, so they got turned to the north, off the tracks, and the cars on the north side of the railroad train got turned off the tracks to the south, and the cars in the middle did not get turned. They got shook and but they did not get derailed, and that's where all the men were staying. So they all survived, but that train just was twisted like a towel by the tornado. Just fascinating. So
unfortunately, they survived because they became important first responders.
Yes.
After the disaster.
Yes.
And used their cars that weren't overturned as shelters for some of the survivors too.
Yes. Yeah.
So, Jim, talk for a minute about the use of creative nonfiction, because our witnesses to a lot of these events are slowly dying away. And if we don't record this history, in some way, shape, form, or fashion, it's going to be lost. So talk about employing that technique in the writing to bring this story to life, because you've won a lot of awards over the years, and I see why. You did that very, very well here.
Well, thank you. And so one of the writer's main jobs is to tap into imagination and tap into it in such a way that the reader then also taps into it. Anything that I write is only half done. The reader has to do the other half. And so the more I can create through that imagination, this really was not my story. Like I said before, I did not live here. I did not know about it until 2011, and when I started researching it. So I had to imagine my way back into those experiences, those people's stories. And like one of the main characters, Rowe, the mayor, he died in the 80s. So all of his sections, I had to use his daughter's words, his daughter's story, which were great. And she was very, very helpful, as well as newspaper clippings. He was kind of the main person that all the reporters went to. But at the same time, there was these gaps. Like there's a conversation that he had in the evening, the night, the 24 hours after the tornado, with two officials from what would have been FEMA at the time, and they were saying, how can you rebuild? How can the town is gone? There's no way we can rebuild. And yet, he realized that we needed to go through and make this happen. And so, what else do I need to say here?
I thought that was fascinating how you talked about how he set about afterwards, moving he seemed to be a very forceful fella from, somebody said right after the tornado to him, and I don't want to give too much away here, but the comment was, I'm going to rebuild somewhere else. And he said, over my dead body, you're going to rebuild somewhere else. You're going to rebuild here.
Right.
And, it takes those kind of leaders in a situation like that to reinstill confidence in the community.
Yes. And that's one of the lessons from the Udall tornado is the importance of leadership. the same tornado or the same system wiped out the town in Oklahoma called Blackwell, and it killed 20 people there. And that happened roughly an hour before the Udall storm. And again, it happened. So again, it was dark and there was no warning. But afterwards, I mean, immediately after with the search and rescue, and then even longer with the rebuilding, from what I've read, Blackwell just didn't have a strong leader, and so the search and rescue took a lot longer and was a lot more disorganized, and even some search and rescue people were unwelcome and turned away. So that did not happen in Udall, thankfully, and the importance of leadership in that moment was crucial. And yeah, one of my favorite lines is what you just said. Toots was like the day after, he was going through the rebel searching for whatever he could find, and one of his friends was the town marshal, Wayne Keeley, and he came up and they shared how they survived. They both got in, barely survived, and they talked about who they lost, and who was injured, and then Toots asked Wayne, well, what are you going to do? And Wayne Keeley, the town marshal who'd grown up in the town and had worked there all his life, said, well, I think I'm going to live somewhere else. And Toots said, the hell you are. You're going to rebuild with me, and we're going to be neighbors still. I mean, it's just powerful declaration that became a chorus. He said that to other people, and then it just kept rippling. And that spirit of, that energy and that force of will of, this is my home and I'm going to rebuild it. That's what we need in times like that.
Well, being weather people, we're, always drawn to, official issuances, and you use some verbatim teletype reports. Talk about the source of that and how it was used in those days. Of course, we are familiar with how, NOAA WeatherWire, eventually evolved, but talk about that service and who used it, who received it, and then how like the television and radio stations used it.
So the communications, the one lesson was of leadership. The other lesson from Udall that just is so powerful and in stark contrast to us today is the need for communication. So the teletypes were sent out from the Weather Service, and then are supposed to be picked up by the local medias, so TV and radio, and newspaper as well. But just the turnaround was so slow. So the tornado in Blackwell happened an hour before, and the news of that tornado, I think, had to go from Kansas City to Denver to Wichita. Wichita was the nearest close city that had the National Weather Service office there. And then from Wichita it was transmitted. So, just that triangle that slowed it all down. And Wichita also heard about it from, I think, some newspaper or radio station heard Blackwell police talking about a tornado, and they called Wichita and Weather Service, and is this true? And that was the first they had heard about it. And so just the lack of communication, the inability to transmit the horror that was coming their way was one of the huge problems of the time period. And then the other was just getting the word out. So the Wichita National Weather Service office finally sent out their tornado warning. So they had given tornado warnings, or watches, I should say, earlier, what we'd call watches, earlier in the day, but none of them ever included Udall. And then finally, when they heard about the Blackwell tornado, Blackwell town getting torn out, wiped out by the tornado, they issued a statement, warning that came out at 10:08 p.m. And by that time, the local news had already been given, and many people had, many people had turned off the TVs or the radios, and a couple people even said that said the tornado warning had been called off, and I wasn't able to verify that on any written sources, but that they were just totally not aware of this storm coming to them. Even though an hour away, it had already killed 20 people and wiped out half of a town. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
absolutely. I did see some comments, and I don't know if it was in one of the picks tonight, folks. You gotta stick around for the picks. We should have done the picks at the beginning because everyone had a Udall theme tonight, and there's some spectacular information in those picks, even beyond the book. But and somewhere I read, either in the story or in one of those websites, someone mentioned that they had heard weather warnings that night from Wichita. And even though there wasn't an official tornado forecast, or what they called it back in 1955 in effect at that time, I wondered, was anybody in the town really paying attention to radio or television from your experience? And they had, these are hardy souls that live out here in the plains. They were used to bad weather. Did the storm strike them as especially severe as it approached?
So your first question, I know of two of the families that I kind of use as main characters. They were watching the TV at 10 o'clock and as the storm came on. In fact, the mayor's family was watching it, and the weather forecaster said tornado warnings in Oklahoma this evening. And the daughter said to the mayor, aren't you glad you don't live in Oklahoma tonight? And here comes the tornado to them. So I know that, yes, that at least two of the families were watching the TV and hoping to catch the weather statements for that evening. And then as far as the people like being aware of the storm, they were aware. Yeah, they were definitely aware that the weather was very unsettled, and it was very powerful system coming towards them. But it was at night, and they had a hard time really seeing it. And then they heard it, and then they knew it was time to really, it was almost too late if it wasn't too late. So yeah, they were very aware of, they knew the signs. But at the same time, we all get a little jaded about, it's just another big storm. We don't need to worry too much. So
we're bombarded in this part of the country with severe weather information on media and internet, but I'm not sure when that started. In 1955 on a Wednesday night approaching midnight, when people were probably already thinking about their next day, who is listening after the newscast is finished at 10:30?
No. Yeah, nobody. Yeah. Yep. In fact, the Atkinson family, Bobby Atkinson's father, was watching Tennessee Ernie Ford. So it wasn't even the news program had turned off, and now it was back to the entertainment. So, yeah.
It was a very different world and weather communication environment, and everyone keep that in the back of their minds for just a minute. We just had our panelist Neil Jacobs join us, and he might only be able to be here for a little while, so we wanted to welcome him to the show. Hey Neil, how's it going?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm literally just got off the metro probably 90 seconds ago. ran upstairs and hopped on. I've been at the AMS Washington Forum all day. Of course, it's Chatham House rules, so I can't talk about it, but lots of great conversations, and got a busy day tomorrow, obviously.
Yeah. So for those who aren't aware, why don't you tell us what's happening tomorrow?
It's a full committee hearing with a House Science Committee on whether or not NOAA should stay in the Department of Commerce or be an independent agency.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tell us, so Neil is busy tomorrow because he is going to be giving testimony as part of the hearing. So Neil, can you give us the gist? What are the highlights of the remarks you have planned?
You'll have to tune in tomorrow to find out. It'll be live.
We'll be glued to C-SPAN tomorrow, Dr. Jacobs.
I mean, the backstory is, and I don't know a lot of people really know this, NOAA was taken out of, stuck in Department of Commerce because Nixon was upset.
Right.
Yeah. And it was done with an executive order. So believe it or not, NOAA their existence has never been authorized by Congress. Everything they do has been authorized by Congress, but the actual agency doesn't exist according to Congress. It was created with an executive order. And the concerning part to me is you could make it go away with an executive order. And so there's kind of two parallel discussions. One is NOAA's Organic Act, which is Congress authorizing the existence of NOAA and everything you do. And the other one is, while you're doing that, do you leave it in Department of Commerce or do you make it an independent agency? And there's no debate about the Organic Act. That's kind of a no-brainer. The debate is really about whether it stays in DOC or not. And there's a lot of pros and cons and a lot of budget issues that you'll have to overcome, because there are things that DOC does for NOAA that NOAA would have to do for themselves, and they don't have the money to do it. So I'll save the rest for my opening statement in the morning.
Yes. So that will be exciting. What time can people tune in to the hearing?
It starts at 10, and I think there'll probably be some opening remarks from Chairman Lucas and Ranking Member Lofgren, and then it'll be myself, Admiral Gallaudet, and Admiral Laudenbacher are the three witnesses.
Neil
and then they'll get their go. Yeah,
sounds like a band name.
Yeah, I mean, it should be good. I don't think it's really a partisan issue. The challenge was they were looking for former administrators, and it's some of the ones that are now part of the Biden administration. It's really hard with short notice to get them clearance to go testify if they're part. Like, I don't need any clearance. I'm just representing myself, which made life really easy. So I don't know. That may or may not make people nervous tomorrow.
That'll be really good. Actually, officially, Neil and I, since I just changed jobs, which I know I haven't discussed on WeatherBrains yet, but we are both technically UCAR CPACE people, so have a little bit of that freedom just to say that stuff, which is fantastic. Neil, while we have you, I promised Neil that I was going to embarrass him with this. He got some good news. There was a report put out that talked about different measures of employee perspectives on leadership at NOAA. And how did your general administration fare, Neil? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the survey is called the FEVS, or the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. And the last year of my time at NOAA, we set the all-time high record on every metric in the history of the agency.
And I'll give a little perspective on what I credit with that, but then you can embellish some. I think for people who weren't outside of NOAA when the pandemic began, especially, you might not have been aware of what was going on internally, but it was, for everyone, it was a really difficult time. But there was this big question that had been floating, especially since at that point there were a lot of scientists who were demoralized for a lot of reasons, and especially in our field. And there were just questions about how do we keep a coherent NOAA? How do we keep everyone together in this time? And Neil and Tim, it was very clear that they took this approach of, we're going to reach out to every employee and make them feel valued and understand what they're doing and give input and comment. And I mean, I felt it right away. Admiral Gallaudet was messaging me about a bunch of different things, and I was just like, who am I? What? I do not deserve this at all. And then other of my colleagues started to hear from him as well. And we were all just like, oh my gosh, I feel so good. This is just so nice. I've never experienced something like this before. And I gave a webinar on some of my research, and Neil followed up, and he was just like, oh yeah, here's a question. I was the person behind that really difficult question. Sorry about that. But I was like, no, that was actually, that's like the thing I worry about. That's a really good question. And, just, he diligently would do things like, people are going to give webinars, I'm going to read their entire paper and come and ask difficult questions. And for an administrator to do that is a lot. Neil, can you just talk a little bit about, you and Tim, your approach in that time, and how much time and effort you put in to doing that? I think that is at heart in why there was such a huge market uptick in employee satisfaction with leadership in those years.
It was all about just reaching down and in and supporting all the employees on a personal level. And I mean, Tim, he's connected on every form of social media that exists, and I'm the exact opposite. I'm not even on LinkedIn, but I was able to reach all these employees via email or just show up. I mean, I started just driving around and showing up with pizza and donuts at forecast offices. And that stuff, it's interesting. I feel like with Tim and I had this mantra that if you take care of the people will take care of the mission. And what we tried to do was just reach everybody, and just, even if it was just to send them like a 1-sentence email, like, hey, you're doing an awesome job. I saw this report you did, or you got this award. And they're just like, holy cow, like, the freaking administrator Noah just sent me an email saying, good job. Like, I don't even know if the person that I directly report to knows what I look like. And so that, I think it was contagious too. It actually, it worked better than I thought it did. And maybe that was part of the pandemic allowing us to help, but we literally either met or emailed every employee. That's 12,000 people. And I guarantee you, Tim probably emailed all 12,000 of them more than once. But we would wake up every morning at about 2 a.m. and email people until probably 6 or 7 a.m. And also doing like other work email. It's pretty funny because the staff would get up at like 7 or 8, and Tim and I were like 30 emails deep in some chain that people are freaking out trying to play catch up on before they've even had coffee. And then we would work. I didn't go to bed until midnight. So on average, I'd sleep about 90 minutes to maybe 2 hours a night. I mean, it's not sustainable, but I knew I wasn't going to be there for, this wasn't my career. I had a short amount of time here. So I just, ran myself ragged trying to just support everyone. And I think it showed up in the results.
Agree. There's a comment in the chat that those are span hours. And
yeah, buddy. Yes. I can relate to that, Neil. Yes, indeed. We'll sleep when we're dead.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm probably die a lot sooner, but I feel like you've only got so many awake hours in your body, and you can burn through them pretty fast if you don't sleep. But that's okay. You get a lot more stuff done.
Hey, Neil, before this hearing tomorrow, do you get to go to the blue room, the green room, and get the makeup stuff going?
They do have kind of like a green room area, but there's no makeup artist, or the C-SPAN cameras are probably, 320 pixel resolution or something. So,
I'll tell people I'll paint on this barn won't help. It doesn't matter with me, but you're a young guy. You're a good looking guy. I mean, a little powder would do you good there, probably.
Yeah, I can ask. I'll probably get laughed at.
Hey, can you flash some sort of WeatherBrains hand signal. So you know
Yeah.
Yes. We'll be looking for it. And actually, if you want some pointers on makeup, on the committee now is our meteorologist friend Eric Sorensen, and he was the broadcast meteorologist for many years. So hey man, if you're looking for somebody to compliment you, if you do go for the makeup, he's your guy.
Yeah. Hey Eric, if you're listening to the podcast, ask me some easy questions tomorrow.
Yeah, take it easy on Neil, please.
Yeah, that's going to be really amazing tomorrow. We'll have a meteorologist on both sides of that bench, and so a great thing for people to tune into. And good luck tomorrow. We're cheering you on, Neil, and we're glad that you're able to join us for this episode. And with that, I'm going to pass things off to Jen and let Neil jump in if he has anything before he's got to run again. But thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to hop off. I got to go through my prep work of the expected answers to questions, but just wanted to hop on and say congrats on 900. That's a crazy large number. I can't believe it's been.
You're a huge part of it, Dr. Neil. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Neil.
You guys are awesome. See you next week.
Thank you.
Hi, Neil. All right, I'm going to leap back into the discussion with Jim. So I've been antsy to ask you some questions, Jim. Just so you know, I own Tornado Talk, and we are a website all about tornado history. So I have just loved your book so far. I haven't been able to finish the whole thing, but I got through over half while I was curled up on the couch today reading. I love it. So I have just a few questions for you. I want to go back to talking about the warnings just a little bit. You brought up in the book the history of the tornado warning and how for a period of time there, they couldn't even mention the word tornado. That's fantastic history. And it had been, less than 20 years that this tornado hit. And I have to think that there was probably still some kind of a mentality here about, do we say a tornado? What do we do? Did you get that sense that maybe there was still some hesitancy of even mentioning tornado at that point?
I don't know. I don't know. But I will say just this conversation that y'all just had with Neil just made me think of that as well, in terms of, the whole politics influencing our weather forecasting. And, it started out after the Civil War pretty successfully tracking, starting to understand the systems. And then the political climate changed, and they were afraid that if they said the word tornado, the leaders were afraid that if the word tornado was used in forecasting, people would go hysteric. And so yeah, that just fascinated me. And here we are again. What are we going to do politically to keep the weather accurate and alive? But as far as the time period, I don't know. I couldn't find any weather forecasters who were alive at that time to really get their insight. I did talk to some elder people in the National Weather Service, and they were very helpful with some details about those forecasts. And it was tracked with radar from Oklahoma, which was kind of a new thing, I think. So, but as far as the weather people being afraid to use the word tornado in 1955, I don't know if that still existed or not. Yeah, I can't answer that question.
Yeah,
even if they wanted to, how are they going to get the word to the people that need to hear it?
Right. Yeah, that was the bigger problem. It's like, yep. Yes,
so
indeed.
Going back to, you mentioned that this was a 12-year process. This took 12 years to get out. And can you talk about your interview process? What was that like to talk to these folks who either had family members that, were part of the tornado, or they lived through it themselves like Bobby did? What was that like? And just the emotion still this far removed from when it happened. I'm sure it had to still be so raw.
In a lot of ways it was, yeah. And yet in a lot of ways it was, so I interviewed started in 2011 with interviews, and then I was working full time, and then I went back to school to get an advanced degree, and I had this other book that came out. So, those years were filled up with other things. But that also gave me time to process the interviews that I collected, and then start trying to write the stories. And then as I started to write, I realized there's holes, and that's back to the earlier question where imagination and the creative part comes in. That and so I would go back and interview them again. And this tornado was and still is the worst in Kansas history. And it happened in 55. So there's all this time that, people's memories change, as well as people die. And so the survivors had told their stories, I think, several times already, to journalists who would come through, every 5 or 10 years anniversary. And so once I got their first interview and started to try to make their story into the book, I realized I needed to ask them more specific and sometimes more difficult questions. And so that would be the follow-up interview. And then, sometimes it was hard for them. And often they would say, I don't know, or I don't remember. And then once I had a draft of a person's section, I would share it with them. If they, were the survivor, or even if they were a family member, I would share it with them and get their insight and corrections and approval, and especially those imagined parts. I would say, I would tell them up front what I was trying to do. And I say, here's one line that you gave me that I wanted to elaborate on, and so this, section is my imagination. So do you think this is accurate? And almost always I said yes, or they would, help me, or they would give me, oh, this makes me remember this happened, and it would be even richer thanks to. So it was a collaboration in some of that respect. I think I interviewed Bobby Atkinson probably 3 or 4 times, and some of the others the same. Definitely 3 times.
Bobby was just one of the characters that I wrote down in my notes. They're amazing story. One of the things that I challenge my writers and researchers is, if there is a fatality in the event, that I want to try to find the name and age of the person so we can honor their memory. And I wanted to talk to you about, because there's a lot of discrepancies in how many people died in this tornado. You have 82. I think the official record, I've seen 80, I've seen 77, so how did you land on 82 as the official?
I'm glad you asked, because I think the official for Udall itself is 77. Mm-hmm. And I added 5. So right a couple of miles away from Udall, there's a little town called Oxford, and outside of Oxford, the tornado hit this family farm. This mother was home alone. Her husband was like 300 or 400 miles away at a sanatorium because he had tuberculosis. And so this woman was home alone with her 10 children. And the tornado just totally wiped it out and killed 5 of those children. And so I include those 5 in that. Separate, and if in the appendix there's a list of the dead, and they're separated out by town name. But I think that I grew up in a very rural place, and I wanted to be inclusive of that. So I would say 77 is official for Udall itself, and I added those 5 children. But I mean, even you're right. There was a lot of controversy out there how many actually died, and for days after, there was a couple that were totally. So there was a couple of children that were just so mangled that it took the parents a while to find them first, and then to be able to identify them. So yeah, the dead tally was not quick or easy to come up with.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
awful.
Yeah.
I like how you told the story. You didn't just completely focus in on the death. Like you talked about that and you honored the memories of those who died, but then you also brought in the heroism, of those who helped, just dove right in immediately to help pull people from the wreckage, and then just the whole rebuilding. I love all of that aspect of it. And no matter what story you tell, or from whatever tornado event, there are those aspects of it, but they're always so different. And so I think it's so important to share. The other thing we always find too, and I wanted you to maybe mention a couple of these, are the bizarre stories. Like
Yes.
I found it bizarre that the water tower was flattened and it fell straight down into the middle of the road, and it didn't hit one house. It just fell
Yes.
right straight down. And so, but there were a couple of other little bizarre things that you were able to dig out.
Yes. Yeah. That water tower, it is haunting in a way. That was kind of the landmark of the town, and it was in the center of an intersection, so all the cars had to go around it. And so, and because of the spin of the tornado, it hit that water tower and went straight down, and did not hit any houses. And just as an aside, as a haunting aside, the recent tornado in Roaring Fork in Mississippi, there was a tornado. There was a water tower that fell there too. It just this echoed for me the Udall tornado. So other kind of miracles or oddities. There was, see if I can remember these. There was a family, the band director's family of, I don't know, his wife and 3 or 4 kids, maybe 5 kids. They all huddled in under the stairs, of this 2-story house, and in this tiny little closet under the steps. And the tornado completely wiped out the whole house except for the steps, and that was what how they survived. The tornado supposedly, there was a vase and a rose on a table, and that was survived, and it was made it, the vase was on the table, and the tornado took away everything that was on this kitchen, except this table, the kitchen table, and this vase with the flower that survived the tornado. Just, crazy. Yeah. The house that the Lacey family lived in was kind of in the northern part of the town, and the tornado, where the tornado was least strong, and it decimated the Lacey's house, but it did not touch the houses that were on either side or across the street, like 30 feet away. But it totally, wiped out. And Clara Lacey was home alone. Her husband worked the swing shift in Wichita, and Clara was home alone with her very young two boys, and she was pregnant with a third. And she just laid on bed with her 2 young kids and got knocked out. And then the whole house got blown away, and she ended up in a like a fence catching her, and just barely survived that tornado. So yeah.
So
it's hard to talk about.
Yeah. It is hard to talk about.
Yeah,
Yeah,
all the kids.
Oh,
Yeah, the kids survived, and she had another baby boy.
Oh,
yeah. So
Yes.
That was a miracle. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is a miracle. Yes. It's really, these things are difficult to reflect on, and it's, you hear these survival stories and it just seems so miraculous anyone could make it. But I'm curious, if you know if there was any count ever taken, or if there's any approximation you could offer for how many people were in this tornado, because that fatality count in rural places, that could be a very high fraction of the population that was exposed to the tornado. It is the question that came up after the April 27th, 2011 outbreak. There were so many people who perished, and it was a really similar figure to honestly what had happened April 3rd, 1974. And when we went through and just did a rough estimation of, what might have been the exposed population under those tornado tracks in those two time periods, the fatality rate was kind of similar, which kind of makes you feel like, man, our warning system, does it do what, there's over all that time, those 40 years between, what have we added? What are we doing? And I mean, in the 50s, even before, like we were just talking about, warnings were even just in the most nascent stage. We just started to maybe talk about tornadoes publicly because we were so afraid of how people would respond. Do you have any information about what the fatality rate might have looked like, or how many people, like how big of a deal was this to these local places?
So the town had roughly 600 people living in it, and so 77 or 82 died, and I think there were 270 injured. So there is over half the population death or casualties. So, and then the other, when I put the death list, the people who died, when you really look at that list, a third of the dead were children. And then the Udall had three, they called them care homes, or what we would call nursing homes. There were three care homes in the town, and they were hit the hardest. So, the fatalities, roughly a third were young, and roughly a third were very old. So, yeah.
Well, I wanted to really quickly just say, that's the highest fatality rate I have ever heard of by far.
Wow.
And
wow.
I think, it might be something where we need to really credit ourselves with. By the 70s, we at least have gotten pretty good at talking about tornadoes. And, even if warnings were on a nation stage, we had them, and we had radar, and, there's power in information. And I just feel like in the 50s, they probably had absolutely none of that. And the difference is enormous. And that had to be, you're talking about a third of the entire population was at least injured.
Yes.
And 10% of the population died.
Yes.
That is far higher. Joplin, that tornado, the estimated fatality rate is about 1.2%.
Wow.
So this is a 10 times higher fatality rate, just down the state, so that's really, that had to be absolutely a crushing event. Thank you for sharing that.
Wow. I didn't know that was 10%. Wow.
And,
So
Kim, there's a link between Udall and Joplin, yes, because Joplin was the last, before Joplin, Udall was the last city to have 50 fatalities in one town from a tornado until Joplin. And of course, I never thought Joplin, we'd have those kind of fatalities again in a single city. I always thought that Udall was the end of that. We'll never have that happen again. But of course, it's pretty, we had several events in 2011 in Alabama, and, that were, single tornadoes killed close to 50 people so certainly terrible. There's an interesting story on the Weather Service in Norman's page, because they talk about the Blackwell tornado. I don't know if you ran into the same thing, but there was an eyewitness at Blackwell named Floyd Montgomery, who, was looking up into the funnel, I think is the story. And he had to look away because the light was so bright. It was like the arc of a welder's lamp. And I wondered if you heard any kind of similar stories. We know there, probably was an evolved supercell that, cycled and produced the second tornado. But did you have any strange electrification things. And I picked up something you noticed in the book, and I'll bring it up, and then I'll let the rest of the panel ask some questions.
I know that the people, the survivors, really noticed the brightness. They continually commented on how bright. After, like, the survivors, when they were able to crawl out, they saw, they were able to use the lightning to get through town. Yeah. But I do remember the eyewitness account of like he compared it to arc welding, the brightness of the intensity of the lightning and the storm from the Blackwell witness. I do remember reading that. The other interesting connection to Joplin, in Udall, there was a wedding shower that kind of became one of the main storylines. There was a bridal shower in the community building of Udall where the tornado completely wiped out the building, and there were 14 people in this bridal shower who survived. The community building was completely destroyed. And so the woman who had this bridal shower, her name was Eileen Holtze Wittenborn, and she was her granddaughter. So Eileen Wittenborn was a school teacher from, I don't know, 40 years, grew up near Udall and taught for 40 years. Her granddaughter was going to college in Joplin when the Joplin tornado struck. And so I was able to weave that into the very last section. Like, I had where are the survivors now? And I was able to use that story then. That just blew me away when this granddaughter just barely survived the Joplin tornado as well. Yeah.
Jim, you mentioned one of the families in their storm shelter that the flame on the candle jumps, and while the tornado was passing over, jumped to about 10 inches high. I wonder if anybody else had ever heard of a similar situation and maybe had an explanation for why that happened.
I don't know.
Anybody? Yeah, Troy, any history like that? I just thought that was fascinating. And your family has some background in that. Your great grandmother was a folk faith healer who could take the fire out of burns, right, Jim?
Right. Yes. Yeah.
So yeah. You were probably a little more sensitive to comments about fire, for sure. I know that the rest of the panel has been just loving this show tonight, because it's fascinating to talk to someone who's at the top of their craft, telling a story that's very important to our community of weather. So I'll kind of go around. I'll start with Bruce Jones. Bruce has joined us, of course. He is always on top of weather history and has great knowledge, and passed us a private message after last week's show. And we talked about it earlier, Bruce, about the Life magazine story with the picture. And of course, Jim had seen that same picture that you mentioned that you didn't want to bring up on the show, but I felt like I had to. So, because I guess that was our method for seeing hard images back in the 50s. It wasn't really to television yet to do that, or social media, but Life magazine seemed to sometimes show some photos that maybe would shock you out of your sensibilities a little bit.
That was shocking to me, and I have the magazine right here. Did you show it, by the way, the cover of the magazine? I wouldn't show the picture, but the cover has Henry Fonda on it, and this was the June 6th, 1955 issue of Life magazine. But yeah, it was just in perusing the magazine, I was just a little bit shocked at how graphic the photograph was in there. And then they have an interesting little explainer as to an artist rendering of the storm with a tornado over Blackwell and another tornado over Udall. As our knowledge of tornadoes back then was a little bit primitive, but they were just trying to give people a picture of what had occurred. But yeah, it's an interesting magazine for sure.
In the centerfold, the centerfold of that magazine is a great aerial of the destroyed town after. It's very powerful as well. Yeah.
When I saw the Greensburg tornado, that reminded me so much of Udall. Same time at night, same size tornado, same ferocity of tornado, and moving due north.
Yes.
Those are so similar to me. It was kind of spooky in a way.
Yes. And there's a paper by a fellow named Mike Smith, I think, that compares the two and goes through all those similarities, and very, very similar.
And if you move that Udall tornado track over 5 or 10 miles to the east, Arkansas City and Winfield are in the path with that motion. It could have been so much worse.
Yes.
I went to the Udall Museum. I've been there a couple of times, actually.
Oh,
yeah. And of course they got the basketball. How far did that basketball travel in the storm?
I don't know, probably at least 12, probably 20 miles. I don't know specific, but
picked up at the high school. It was a high school basketball, right?
Yeah. And the diploma, high school graduation diploma of one of the Gaylord Thompson made it roughly 12 to 15 miles blown away, and here they picked it up, and it made it. The
one picture from the Udall Museum that I used to show in doing spotter training and so forth was the marble collection. Do they still have the marble collection there?
They do. Yes, they do.
Typical small town museum. People donate various little things, whether it has to do with the tornado, or whatever.
Yeah.
And some guy donated this wonderful collection of marbles. And, people, when they call in marble size hail, need to realize there's a lot of different sizes of marbles. And I never realized it till I went to the Udall Museum and saw this huge display case with marbles of every conceivable size.
Yes.
And Kim, some other things have different sizes too, don't they?
Oh yes. I mean the hen egg. What is a hen egg? It's the standard hen egg size. Yeah, lime softballs. Rick is commenting. It's it's a little ambiguous. Well,
Kim, you were mentioning earlier that we'd made some progress by the 1974 outbreak, and as a sixth grader who was petrified of the weather on that night, I can assure you we'd not made as much progress as we needed to have made. Because I literally spent that entire night scanning the AM and FM radio trying to get any kind of information, because literally it was not anything like it is today, and I just was petrified that entire night. So we'd made some progress, but not as much. But a lot of people in Alabama that night on April 3rd, 1974, said they heard the warnings and took shelter and action because of it, and it obviously probably did cut the death toll down in Alabama that night.
When did we start the nationwide RAYOB network and the balloon launches twice a day? Because that really helped with your 1974 outbreak.
Yeah, that was probably back in the 40s, I would think.
Early 40s, I think. Yeah.
And being able to get that disseminated to the field offices where just with basic SCUT analysis that pretty much every storm going up today is going to be a tornado threat.
Yeah, before that, it was James Spann with a kite out at the Montgomery airport. That was all the data we had back then.
I think
stole it from Ben Franklin.
Yeah.
Hey, Jim,
Ben was my buddy.
Jim, I wanted to ask a question. I had heard, and maybe someone down at Udall told me, that within about a month or two after Udall, and I think it was in Winfield, they had a gathering that really was the kind of the birthplace of our spotters, our ham spotters. Maybe it was Skywarn. I don't know what it was, but I had heard that was put in motion just after the Udall tornado. Had you ever heard that?
Yes, I have. Yeah, the in two ways, the local citizens of Udall themselves built a watchtower at the edge of the football field because they wanted to avoid they wanted to watch, so they took I forget, a couple hour, at least 2 hour shifts. They built this little watchtower at the edge of the football field at the high school, and they manned that tower and looked out. And they also looked out for Soviet spy planes. That was the error. But but the spotters also, that was also, I don't remember where I read that, but somewhere in national weather history, after Udall, they finally said, okay, we need to have better spotter activity. And that's when they started to teach people to view more. They taught them what a Soviet spy plane looked like, and they also taught them the cloud. They had to identify the different types of clouds. Yes.
So Troy, how did we survive the Cold War and before we had James Spann on television? How did we survive?
I don't know how it was. But the one thing I think that James from Tulsa kind of points out is you've got to separate, I guess, Rick, in a way, the radio signs or the Raywin signs. Dissemination was another deal, probably. I mean, it actually started with World War II. But I have a feeling dissemination was sorely lacking, as I think Jim's pointed out, with WeatherWire back in the 50s and things like that. You can imagine it was tough how many people saw those soundings that were prepared from other locations. Probably not that many.
Yeah, and I know on the night of April 3rd, 1974, and that afternoon, of course, the system nearly crashed in a lot of places. Trying to get tapes from one machine to another, and the overlay that delays. Just the volume of traffic was just terrible. Mr. Robert Ferry, JB used to tell a story on here about communicator at Birmingham about 3 a.m. in the morning that night having a near nervous breakdown, just trying to keep up with all the tapes.
Well, you had to, that was back in the days of the Raywark circuits, and, where they had 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of these around the U.S. And it was, taking one tape and deciding to go on this Raywark circuit or on this one, then on WeatherWire. And nothing was ever very quick. I can remember WeatherWire on the old teletypes like I've got over here, where it'd just be officers busting up routine transmissions and saying stop. And if you remember AWW, they'd enter that in, and then that's how the warning would actually start on the WeatherWire back in the day. So
I can remember the sound the teletype machine would make when they interrupted that circuit.
10 bells.
Yeah, and the bells would come on. Yeah, it's still in my mind today, even though it's been 35 years since we've used those things.
Well, one of the interesting things about that is a story I've told, I think, before on here was, I won't say what office this was, but it was somewhat close to Austin, where they would put 10 bells in there, and that was a coded S on the old teletypes. And one evening at one weather service office or Weather Bureau weather service office, a tornado warning was prepared, and someone in the office said, well, I didn't hear the bells. And they went over and looked at the warning, and it had the Z's in there, but that's not what triggered the 5 Z's. That's not what triggered the bells. And just below that, it said TEN space BELLS spelled out.
Wow.
The intern that night learned a whole lot about WeatherWire.
This is making me feel really young, so I do appreciate it. So thank you. Just an observation. My pick of the week is going to be our website at the Weather Service Norman, the site devoted to this May 25th, 26th event. Looking at the tornado track map from that event, there was 19 tornadoes starting in the eastern Texas Panhandle, several across western Oklahoma, one probably pretty close to my house, it looks like, or not far from here on that night. And then, but the 2 big tornadoes, the Blackwell tornado and what would be the Udall tornado, those tracks just stick out like a sore thumb because they're not the traditional southwest to northeast. The Blackwell tornado essentially moves straight north and then curved to the left as the light ended there. And then the Udall tornado track was pretty much straight, but it did approach Udall from a slightly west of south direction as it kind of made a right turn there. So I know it was at night, and I know that was the big factor of people not knowing it was coming. I have to wonder too, this was not, even here today we have, well, I live in Newcastle, so if I hear a tornado's in Chickasha or Blanchard, I know I have to worry about it. I just wonder if people in those areas, Udall probably was used to tornadoes coming from Wellington, for example. So I just wonder if that had any role in it. Just more of an observation than anything, but just some unusual looking tracks when you look at all the tornadoes from that day, and historically what tornadoes tracks usually, or how they're usually oriented, those really stick out.
And I agree that was an unusual direction that the tornado was going, but I don't know that affected the lack of people knowing about it, because it was at night mainly. Yeah. But yeah, it was very, very strange, I think, for it to become that. And it was a very powerful, like, does that, I don't remember, does that Norman website talk about the airplane, the U.S. Air Force airplane that got hit by the tornado in Texas, like the same night, and killed several people? I think it might have been Army. I forget what branch of the military, but there was much further west of Udall, there was a tornado from the same system that hit a large plane way out in the middle of the country and downed it and killed these airmen.
I hadn't heard that.
Yeah.
Jim, I just wanted to tell you, you've really inspired me with your writing. Sometimes folks who are not meteorologists sometimes don't get the weather right, and they just struggle, trying to balance everything. You did your due diligence, and I really, you can tell that you put the time and energy in with the interviews and everything to put everything together, and it flowed very well. And you did a great balance between the meteorology, and telling the weather part of it, but also it's such a human, it's about the people and what happened. And so I'm to the point in the book now where I'll probably finish it tomorrow, I have a feeling, but I'm to the point where we get to hear, what was the recovery afterward. But what is your hope that folks will take away after reading this book?
Yes. In a very specific way, pay attention to the weather, listen to those warnings, and take cover. But in a broader way, I see this, one of the main reasons I wrote this was I'm worried about climate destruction, climate crisis. And I wanted to see what we can learn from this one major storm about leadership, about community, about resilience and resources. I don't know, I forget the figure. I read somewhere recently, the number of major disasters worldwide has increased a huge amount from the 1990s, let alone the 1950s, to now, like 10, I forget the amount, but back in 1955, this was huge international news. This was covered in London and Paris, and now we see it now in our own. We get so many more natural disasters because of climate change. So how are we gonna help each other rebuild? Should we rebuild on some of these places that ocean water rising and all? The President Eisenhower was a Kansan himself, and he sent a telegram pretty shortly after with the governor of Kansas delivered this telegram saying, we're here to support you, and you're guaranteed, I think it was $250,000 to start the rebuilding. What are we now? What are we able to do, and how are we going to do that for all of our neighbors all over the world who are struggling with climate crisis and natural disasters. And so for me, it was a, a powerful story, very focused, but also much broader. How are we going? What can we learn from this story to help us face the future? Yeah.
Jim, does Udall do anything now? Any kind of scheduled commemoration or anything? Because that's important too for communities.
The last section, or one of the last sections of the book, is I devote to. I wanted to see how they memorialized and commemorated that event. So, and it was interesting to see the changes. So every year, and then it went to every 5 years, and then it faded for a while. They might have had a quiet memorial service in the cemetery, and then one year it was really kind of odd. I forget if it was in the 80s or 90s. They had they made it more of a festival, and they called it Funnel Days, and they sold funnel cakes, and they had a bumper sticker, and that a logo that was not real tasteful, and that disappeared. The next 50-year anniversary, it was thankfully gone. But yeah, they not every year, I don't think, but they regularly remember. They did build in the 90s, they erected a memorial, a big, huge marble slab in their park that had all the name of the dead. And then I'm going back there this coming May 25th, and we're gonna have a memorial service, and then celebrate this book and the town and all those people, that the survivors who are still alive, and their children and grandchildren. It's been really powerful to start to communicate with these ancestors of I've told their family stories. Some of them didn't, like I had one family say, just recently they requested the transcript of the interview. I only interviewed this one fellow one afternoon. Mainly, his sister was one of my main sources, but his sister said, you need to talk to my brother, and so with her help, I interviewed him, and then he died just a couple of years later. And his children contacted me after they read the book, and thanked me for the book, but they also said, could we have that interview transcript? And I said, sure. So and he never talked about it to them. So it was a great gift in that way, to just kind of share his story. And there's a couple others that were like that. Like, I remember one other person that I interviewed, his daughter came along with him, and she said she had never heard him talk about it. So in a way, the book, it was a traumatic, and there are still survivors who do not talk about it. And I respect that. And I did not try to talk to them, but for some, my being a stranger and my willingness to listen and record their stories opened the door for some people who had never really told their story, their experience of that night. So I think that kind of wandered off your question, but yeah, that's still very much part of the town history.
Hey, Jim, we have to take a break here, but when does the book come out? When can people buy this book?
It is available now. It's officially released May 1st, but it is available now. So, and University of Nebraska Press is the press, and they have a 40% discount on it. So you can go there, or you can go to my website and find it and get a good deal on it. So
awesome. Well, if you can stick around for a few minutes, we're going to close the show here shortly, but we're going to take a quick break here from Tony Rice. We'll have Jens This Week in Tornado History. We'll come back with the weather roundup. We'll have email. We'll talk with Bruce Jones. We have picks of the week and much more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
Solar eclipses seem rare, but they really aren't. There will be 224 this century, making for one occurring somewhere on Earth about every 6 months. But there's a solar eclipse happening this Thursday, April 20th, that is truly rare, a hybrid solar eclipse. There are 3 types of solar eclipses. Total, where the sun is completely covered. We'll see one of those in April of next year, stretching from Mexico into Texas, through Maine and on out the Canadian Maritimes. Annular eclipses occur when the moon is just far enough away to appear smaller in the sky than the sun. And that leaves a ring of fire. We'll see that in October of this year, stretching from Oregon to Texas. Then there's the 3rd type, hybrid, which is both annular and total. Hybrid solar eclipses begin as an annular one, transitioning to a total, and then back to annular. The eclipse you see depends on where you are along the path the moon's shadow follows. This will next happen in November of 2031, beginning as an annular west of Hawaii, crossing the equator as a total eclipse, and then ending back as an annular just for a few moments visible from Panama. There will only be 7 of these hybrid solar eclipses this century, or about 3% of the total. The reason these are so rare is the moon has to be in just the right distance from the Earth for them to occur. The moon's orbit around the Earth isn't circular. Sometimes it's a little closer, sometimes it's a little bit farther away. Closer equals bigger in the sky, in a total eclipse. Further away equals smaller in the sky, or an annular eclipse. And about 3% of the time, the moon is along that razor's edge where the middle of the eclipse path puts the Earth just close enough to create a total eclipse. But at each end, that path pulls away from the moon by the curvature of the Earth itself, enough to reduce the moon's size in the sky to just a little bit less than the sun, creating an annular eclipse. Thursday's hybrid begins as an annular in the high latitudes of the Indian Ocean. Just 2 minutes and nearly 650 miles up that path, the Earth's surface has risen enough to close the Earth-Moon distance sufficiently to transition to a total eclipse. This is all happening out in the middle of the Indian Ocean, hundreds of miles from land. But the path continues northeast, passing over a cape in northwest Australia, where the tiny town of Exmouth has been preparing for an influx of visitors for years. The path continues across East Timor and West Papua, Indonesia, before switching back to a hybrid eclipse as the Earth's surface again falls away, increasing that lunar distance. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, a rather photogenic F4 tornado traveled 70 miles from northwest of Essex, Illinois, to just west of Metairie, Indiana, on April 17, 1963. For Thomas Grzoulis, in significant tornadoes in Illinois, damage was near F5 as several houses literally vanished. I found a very well-written, in-depth overview of this event from Jim Alsop, retired warning coordination meteorologist at the National Weather Service in Chicago. And I used a lot of his research for our summary at tornadotalk.com, and I have a link to his summary as well. He gives the following details about the one fatality from this tornado. Quote, a 24-year-old woman who had just adopted a baby was running across the yard, possibly to get into a ditch, with her baby in her arms when she was struck by debris and killed. She was the tornado's only fatality. She was found with the baby still cradled in her arms, and the baby survived. Calling all weather enthusiasts, join the AMS Weather Band and become part of the American Meteorological Society, whose members have been at the forefront of weather, water, and climate research for over 100 years. You'll get to go behind the scenes with the 10,000 plus scientists, broadcasters, educators, and researchers of the AMS. The AMS Weather Band brings together weather professionals and weather enthusiasts. Band members can grow their knowledge and appreciation of weather and climate by participating in virtual events, online discussions, Q&As, AMAs, webinars, photo contests, and more. AMS Weather Band gives you the opportunity to interact directly with those in the scientific community. Learn more and join the band today at amsweatherband.org.
Hey, time to dig into the good old email inbox because there just might be something in there this week.
We sure do have some stuff to talk about. First of all, thank you to everybody who has wished us a happy 900th anniversary here of our show. We've had stuff on email and Twitter and Facebook. We really appreciate it. Thank you guys for listening every week. We really appreciate it. We got an email earlier last week from Johnny Parker, our friend in Mississippi, and he had some interesting tidbits. I can't get through all of them here, but I want to at least read through a couple. It just was I love getting stuff like this, little weather tidbits the state of where we're at right now. But he has this stat. First of all, as of April 11th, the Western Pacific has gone 100 days without having its first typhoon. I think that's still the case, right? We still don't have a typhoon? I don't think so. And so he gave us the stat of that. And then also the Amory, Mississippi tornado was rated EF3. That is the only second EF3 to occur in or within the city limits of Amory. And the only other one occurred in November of 1973 on the south side of town. So thank you, Johnny, for those stats. We got a comment from Michael Hansen about weather apps. We talked about that last week. Apparently there is a NOAA Weather Radio app that you can listen to other NOAA weather radio stations from across the country. For some reason, you can't hear Montana. I'm not sure why. On that way, maybe we'll ask Bruce that in just a second, because I have another email for Bruce. We also have Nate Larson telling us about the Minnesota Severe Weather Awareness Week. And then we have this email coming in from Brian Griffiths. And so I'm going to bring in our friend Bruce Jones from Midland Radio. I get the opportunity to do that today. And we don't get a whole lot of tornadoes in Maryland, Brian says, but I figure you guys would be happy to know that when my Midland NOAA weather radio went off during a recent tornado test up here, my 3-year-old son told my wife, tornado warning. We taught our kids that if the radio goes off during a storm, we take shelter, and the one time we had to do it went smoothly. Listeners should not underestimate the importance of making your kids weather aware young. Keep up the good work. Wow. So Bruce, take it away. It's true. You have to teach them young. Here's a 3-year-old. He's like, tornado warning, we're off. That's what we need to be doing. Yeah, it's awesome.
Well, you know, for those of us in the media who had to work during tornado outbreaks, for emergency managers who have to work during tornado outbreaks, for military personnel who have to stay on the job regardless of what the weather is doing. You know, I think your family should always have a NOAA weather radio at home so that you never have to worry about whether or not they know there's something bad happening. You're fully, you know, you're at ease because you know that they get the warnings immediately as soon as they're issued. So it's something that I think that we should teach children from the get-go. And I'm so glad that the kids are getting the message and sharing that with mom and dad. That's fantastic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and I want to tell you a quick story. A few weeks ago, we had some crummy weather up here, and I was at church, and you know, most folks that I've gotten to know are like, they know what I do for a living. And so the one lady, she's like, I couldn't get my husband to go to the basement. And I said, well, don't listen to him. I said, you need to go to the basement. And she said, I couldn't hear the siren. I don't, you know, it was the siren thing. She goes, well, and whatever. And I'm like, you need a NOAA weather radio. And she didn't even know what one was. So I said, I need your cell phone number. And I texted her the deal that we have going on here, if you want to talk about that, Bruce. But so she knows how she can get one and how she can get 1% off. So she has a NOAA weather radio, and she's not relying on anything else. She's relying on the safe way to make sure she can get her and her son down to the basement and hopefully drag her husband down there with her.
Well, I'm glad, Jen, that you mentioned that she didn't know about weather radios, because surprisingly, a lot of people don't. And that's why we ask everyone who listens to WeatherBrains to please get out and spread the word about this and educate people, because, you know, people are busy and they're doing other things and they don't stop to think about this. But once you tell people about the NOAA Weather Radio Network and explain to them what it is and how it operates, they're like, well, this is a no-brainer. And I think the best way to explain NOAA Weather Radio, number one, it was designed to be an indoor tornado siren. And number two, it works a lot like a smoke detector. And so they've dubbed it the smoke detector for storms, because these devices sit and monitor silently a broadcast direct from the National Weather Service. And if the National Weather Service says there's trouble in your area, this weather radio goes off with a 80 decibel alert tone that you can't miss. And that's the whole idea. So these devices save lives. But again, despite all we've talked about over the last many decades, there are a lot of people who, for one reason or another, either haven't heard about weather radio or they don't quite understand how the system works and how it would work in their home. So please spread the word. These devices save lives. And the promo code that Jen was talking about is SPAN25, SPANN 25. That's the promo code you use at midlandusa.com. And when you use that promo code, you can get 25% off of a weather radio. So you can buy a desktop weather radio to use at home, and you set it up so it only goes off for your specific area. You can buy these emergency crank radios that are good for a hurricane evacuation, or good for an ice storm where you might lose power for hours or days or longer. There are different types of weather radios for different purposes, but all of them have one thing in common. They can save your life. And with the SPAN 25 promo code, you can get one for 25% off. They make great gifts. They should be in every home, school, and business in America. And you, as a fan of WeatherBrains, get an opportunity to help us spread the word and build a weather-ready nation.
Absolutely. Everybody needs one. Bruce, thanks a lot. And while we're on the horn here, let's weather roundup.
When the weather ball is red, warmer weather is ahead. When the weather ball is white, colder weather is in sight. When the weather ball is green, no change in the weather is foreseen. When colors blink by night or day, precipitation's on the way.
Let's do a weather roundup. Let's go to Rick Smith. Rick, you say you do not have issues with sleet or snow. You have the other problem, right?
Well, we may have. Well, we had wildfires today just north of Oklahoma City. We do have slight chances of thunderstorm and maybe some other types of falling ice of the hail variety the rest of this week, dealing with a strong cap. So that's going to be the issue. But right now, Wednesday looks like it could be a day to pay attention to here in central Oklahoma. Again, cap dependent, highly conditional. But if the conditions are there, if we could get a storm to form, there could be different forms of ice falling from the sky. But it's that time of year. But these systems coming through always on the backside with all the wind and the dry air. This is peak wildfire season around here too, and we had a big event just a little over a week ago where a bunch of homes were lost and came close to losing some today again. So there's always something.
Always something. So Kim, when is the climatologically speaking, when does the tornado season peak in Oklahoma?
Goodness, I'm sure Rick knows the exact day, but it's got to be sometime at the middle end of May.
Yeah, probably. It used to be May 3rd was the peak date, oddly enough, but sometime in May. 44% of the tornadoes happen in May, during the month of May. So it's probably the first week, 10 days of May.
Yeah, unlike you guys in Alabama, we have a very distinct weather season with a smaller, relative, like there's a little blip in the fall, but yeah, May is really our time.
So when does the death ridge set in?
Some would say it already has. If you
right?
Look on Twitter.
There are people who are already proclaiming this the season over, given the overall pattern and how it's proceeding.
And people said that in 2013. I don't buy that.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Right. It only takes one.
Yep.
All right, let's go down to Troy in Austin. Troy, how's your heat situation?
Well, back on Saturday, out ahead of that strong cold front that came from the north, Kim and Rick and James and Tulsa came in from the north. We got to 94 degrees out at Camp Mabry, our in-city official climate site. Bergstrom was not quite that hot, but and then that after the cold front, we saw upper 40s last night and this morning at both of our reporting locations. So widespreads in temperature, very dry air in place in addition to the cooling. Unsettled weather pattern over the next few days, little disturbances, increasing moisture, a few showers, maybe a thunderstorm, and then another cold front, fairly strong one in here sometime later on Friday into the weekend, cooling us down a little bit, but signs that an overrunning pattern may develop following that system. So we could use the rain around here, bring it on.
All right, Jen, what's happening in Ohio?
Well, we went from 82 on Saturday to, 32 today. I don't know what it was, but I don't think it hit 40. It was very cold today. That upper low was spinning through and it was very windy and just raw. And then we're back into the 70s by Thursday, and then we get back into the 50s. So this is our period here. We're all over the place up in Ohio. We get a really good front, and then we kind of hold on to the cold air for a little bit. We'll get those disturbances, and then we'll quickly warm back up. But I went from having a sunburn on my arm to seeing sleet and snow. So
How much snow came down in Wisconsin and Michigan today? Do you know?
I'm not sure actually.
It looked like some folks got 5-6 inches in spots up there. It looks like a pretty good snow day for them.
Yeah.
Bruce, what's happening in mid-America?
Well, it was a beautiful day here. The sky was a really deep blue. The air was very, very dry, quite windy yesterday, but the winds had abated some this morning, but it was just a gorgeous sky. I don't think I saw a cloud all day. And the humidity low. So we had a nice cool wind with a high in the 60s. I think our low this morning was down near 40 degrees. So a bit on the chilly side for this time of year.
And Bill Murray, were you in your tank top and flip-flops on the beach today?
It was a nice, fresh northerly breeze here, so it felt good. It was bright blue sunshine, 75 degrees, and it just looked like a perfect spring day. So it was a good day to be down here today for sure.
Awesome. And again, down here, the tornado season is awfully quiet. Typically, we have violent weather in progress in mid-April, but it looks like we really don't have a major risk here for at least the next 10 days, which works for me. So we got to morph right here into picks of the week. And Jim, I'll warn you, we're going to come to you for a pick here before you get off the horn. So be thinking of something good. It could be your own website, could be anything. So we'll come to you at the end. But let's kind of go back up to the top and go to Rick Smith for his pick of the week. Rick, go.
My pick of the week is from our National Weather Service Norman webpage. We have event summaries on there, and we have a pretty good one there about the May 25th, 1955 tornadoes, which included Udall, Blackwell, some really interesting information. Don Burgess has some interesting information about the electrical properties of some of the storms, some really cool maps, and lots of stuff there. So that's my pick.
Awesome. All right, Kim, what's your pick of the week for us?
My pick of the week is a link to the House Science Committee hearing tomorrow featuring our good meteorologist friends.
Yes, I'll be watching to see if Neil puts on any powder. Or I'm telling you, the best powder is CoverGirl. CoverGirl powder is the greatest. It takes away the glare. People don't notice you're wearing it, and it's amazing. So I'm just saying, as a bald-headed man, not that Neil's got plenty of hair, but I'm just saying I would recommend CoverGirl. So, all right, Jen, what you got for us? What's your pick of the week?
So my pick of the week is the tornado surveys from the National Weather Service in Indianapolis from the March 31st tornadoes. And there's a reason why. Last week, I was in Indianapolis briefly just for the night, and I was only 10 miles away from the Whiteland track. And it was an EF3. And I feel bad now because Jim wrote in his book about the people who gawk. And I'm like, oh man, I hope I'm not a gawker. But I wanted to see the damage. And here's why, because I'm a meteorologist. And I write these tornado history stories, and I wanted to see the damage because until you really see it in person, it really has such a different impact. And it really does show you the power of tornadoes when you see the damage. And so I took my aunt and I said, do you want to go chase tornado history? And she said, sure. So the biggest damage was this warehouse that was hit near I-65. And we actually could drive right up to it. It is the worst damage I've ever seen in my life. To see the twisted metal, and it was really gutted out in the middle of it. And the roof of the warehouse was tossed on I-65. And then the tornado dissipated just on the other side of the interstate. And it's just really sobering to see, to drive through. It's an old town. There are a lot of older neighborhoods there that were hit and unroofed. And my heart goes out to those folks. There were no fatalities. I think there were several injuries, but there's something about seeing it to really make it more real.
I totally agree with that. Thanks, Kim. James A., I totally skipped you in the weather roundup. What's happening in Tulsa town, and what's your pick of the week?
The weather ball is getting red here toward the end of the week. So if Rick will keep his stuff over there Tuesday and Wednesday, that would be most appreciated. But it looks like Thursday we finally get that to blast through eastern Oklahoma. So we'll see what happens. My pick of the week is back to Udall. There was a BAMS article published in 1956 by Wayne Statz from the U.S. Weather Bureau and Charles Turrentine from Oklahoma A&M College. And there are some cool old radar pictures, some pretty good analysis, and they actually did some really neat stuff with analyzing the way debris was thrown in this tornado. The wheat fields that they analyzed were pretty good markers too, and it was kind of reminiscent of what Dr. Fujita did after this. So it was a very interesting paper. And the radar pictures, I mean, my hat's off to people back in the day that tried to use those radars to issue warnings. Holy smokes.
The RATS machine. Remember the RATS machine? Those printouts, it would look like somebody barfed on the paper, and they're having to use this to issue warnings off of this. The thing was just absolutely horrible. And I am old enough to have dealt with the RATS machine way back then. And actually, I take that back. We actually had that Enterprise digitized radar for television, that presentation. My second year of doing this, so I only had to deal with it for about a year. But Troy, what you got for us? Go.
I don't think we've talked that much about it, but my pick of the week is, of course, the Climate Prediction Center webpage, the INSO status webpage. I don't think we've talked about the fact that officially we're in that El Nino watch now, and they're saying once we get into May, June, July, that period, a 62% probability of seeing an El Nino develop. So it'll be interesting as we go along the year and see how typical, if that's such a word we can use with Southern Oscillation, how typically the weather begins to shift. Maybe if it does, maybe we're in for a little less of a hurricane season from the Atlantic Basin. But I think it's interesting.
Yeah, INSO is always a player. We know that, but it'll be very interesting to watch the hurricane season unfold this year. All right, Bruce Jones, give us a good pick. Go.
Well, last week I was at the Georgia Emergency Management Conference, and today I was sending a follow-up email to Paulding County Emergency Management. Paulding County, Georgia is right there by Cobb County, northwest of Atlanta. And somewhere on his website, I clicked on a memorial page for Southern Airlines Flight 242 that went down in April of 1977 after it flew directly into a severe thunderstorm. Rain and hail clogged the engines, caused a flame out, and they had to try to land it on a highway there. And I knew of that, but I didn't know exactly where that was. But that was in Paulding County, Georgia, up near New Hope, which is northwest of the Atlanta area. The National Transportation Safety Board review was really blistering. A critique of the piloting decisions to fly that direction, the company dispatch that told them that they might be able to fly through that hole in the clouds, and air traffic control for not supplying real-time hazardous weather information. So my house changed.
That event was apparently, as I understand it, and I'm sure Rick the radar was still black and white in those days, basically, and it caused the radar to rebound. Instead of seeing high reflectivity, there was falsely nothing there in a sense. Yeah, and then because of the NTSB stuff, Bruce, that's the reason we have our center weather units in the FAA centers around the country. So very timely.
Yeah, it's just something I stumbled across at Paulding, Paulding, Paulding County, Georgia's emergency management page.
Yeah.
Well, in the same day, Bruce, we had that horrible F5 tornado north of downtown Birmingham. That was the same parent storm that dropped that F5 that day. That was April 5th, it was 4th or 5th? April 4th, 1977. Just horrible. Horrible day. All right, Jim, we've stalled long enough. Give us a good pick. Go.
The weather.gov Wichita Weather Service, the National Weather Service Wichita office has a Udall page. So weather.gov, .gov/ICT for Wichita/UDALL. It is a page devoted specifically to the Udall tornado. It was very helpful when I was writing the book. That's where the historical documents of the weather forecasts of that time came from. It does have some inaccuracies, especially with the death list. I initially used that and then realized there was a more accurate one in the Udall Historical Museum. But it's a great resource for people wanting to see more about and hear more about this tornado.
And tell us your website one more time in case people want to go find you on the web.
All right, thank you. It's my name, JIM with a hyphen in between. So JIM-MINICK.com. And there is information about Without Warning, as well as my other books, and a listing of events. I'm going to be in the Midwest on book tour, traveling all through Kansas and Nebraska. I was hoping to get down to Norman, but that didn't work out this time. But in May, I'm going to be in the Midwest, with ending up in Udall on May 25th. So it'd be great to see people out there as well. And thank you all for this. This has been great to be part of this for a moment. And to be welcomed, even though I'm not a meteorologist. So thank you very much.
We are delighted to have you, Jim. Thank you. All right, Bill Murray, go. What you got?
Yeah, we'd have never known you weren't a meteorologist, Jim. So it's fascinating that you were able to translate that information into something that was so readable and relatable and accurate from a weather standpoint. Next week, James, I'm going to take the foghorn in a second, so get it warmed up. Dr. Diana Francis will be talking with us next week about dust storms. Looking forward to that. And then on May 1st, Dr. Brian Jewett and Dr. Danae Carlos on the 8th. And we just are now booking the 15th of May for a Dust Bowl story or Dust Bowl show. We've got some great guests getting lined up for that night, because, we're beginning to rival the 1930s in parts of the Central Plains now, Central and Southern Plains, with the drought. And so that'll be a fascinating and important show for us to talk about.
So do I play it now?
Play me the foghorn.
All right.
I gave my pick away to Jim because he gave us so much tonight. We really appreciate you being on the show, Jim.
And so my pick, it's WeatherBrains 1. Since this is 900, if you want to go back and listen to WeatherBrains 1, that'll be my pick of the week. It's audio only, but that was from the 31st of January, 2006. 900, now a wrap. Next up will be 1,000. We're still going to figure out a special place for that. We're going to do that one live somewhere. But anyway,
Bahamas. We're voting for the Bahamas, James.
Bahamas. Hey, listen, if you're new here, we typically record Monday nights at 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central. And a lot of folks do like to watch us live on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/weatherbrains. But we know that most of you listen to the podcast version. If you want to get in touch with us, the email address, it is email@weatherbrains.com. Love to hear from you on behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew. I'm James Spann. Thank you for listening. Have a great week and God bless.
Yeah, I spoke to David Black this week, James, down in Fairhope. He's a big wheeler dealer realty guy. And I told him the show had been going downhill since the day he left.
Yeah, right down the tubes the minute he left. All right.